Good morning, everyone, and welcome to Teams Canada Tech Thursday. Before we get started, just a couple of notes. Everyone is going to be in a listen-only mode. There is definitely a chat window that you can use for asking your questions. You can ask the questions at any time during the session. At the end of the session, we're going to take 5 to 10 minutes if times is available to answer your questions, or we can reach out directly to you later on to answer these questions. This session is going to be recorded. You can have the link for the YouTube channel in the invite that's being sent to you. We're going to just wait for a few minutes, and after that, we're going to get started. Thank you. Okay, welcome everyone to the today's session for Team Canada Tech Thursdays. Today's session is going to be related to optimizing the network performance and the WAN redundancy, which is mainly we're going to be talking about traffic shaping and also quality of service and SD-WAN. On the agenda today, we're going to have a couple of topics. The first one is going to be traffic management, quality of service, the difference between them, what's traffic management, what's quality of service, when to use each one of them. Also about the configuration that's related to setting the outgoing interface bandwidth, where to configure it and when to configure it, how to define a traffic management action, how to add traffic management action to the policy and then use the traffic management within the application control as well. After that, we're going to be covering the SD-WAN, and mainly this topic, it's related to other topics that before it, which is related to multi-WAN, policy-based routing, and then SD-WAN itself. We're going to see the differences between them, when to use to each one of them, and also how to do the configuration. Okay, so let's get started here by talking about the traffic management quality of services. First thing that we need to know that traffic management and quality of services, we usually use them to prevent the data loss of important business applications. So we have different applications that's going through the firewall, and depending on the priority, sometimes we want to have priority for VoIP over other type of traffic, for example. And also to make sure that the mission critical application take priority over other traffic, like for example, a management traffic or a signaling traffic or control traffic. The traffic management quality of services gonna provide you with different benefits. First of all, you can guarantee or limit the bandwidth to a specific amount, depending. Later on, we will talk about it per IP, per policy, and so on. Control the rate at which the firewall sends the packets to the network, again, depending on the speed that you have, and also to provide priority, depending on the queue, to send the packets to the network, depending on the application that you're going to have. Now, when it comes to traffic management, it uses priority queues for the outbound packets on the interface. There is only one queue per interface for traffic management. So this is something that you need to keep in mind. Sometimes people ask, why should I use traffic management and why should I use quality of service? Quality of service will provide you with more queues, right? With the marking in there, you're going to have 8 queues that's going to be used per interface for different types of quality of service packets, and each queue can contain 1,000 packets. Now, when it comes to the lower priority packets, they are sent out only when there are no higher priority packets in the queue, right? When the queue is full, definitely subsequent packets are going to be dropped. This is why talking about that we have different queues. We can assign the marking on the queues depending on the type of the traffic, which one is going to be a higher priority to be sent first. So in some scenarios that you're going to have, for example, the audio traffic, video traffic, that it has more priority over web, email, and file transfer. So the streaming or voice over IP, or sometimes it's controlled traffic that's giving more priority over the others. Now, for the firewall operating system, it supports two types of quality of service marking. The IP precedence, which is widely used, also known as a type of service, and also another one, which is DSCP, or differentiated service code point marking. That also it's been used by some vendors, like for example Cisco. So depending on the marking that it's required within the network, or with the ISP, or with the firewall that you're going to be dealing with on the other side, then sometimes you can choose one of them. Now, when it comes to the traffic management quality of service, also it's going to affect the maximum throughput on the firewall, right? Because we are doing an extra check here to classify or kind of categorize the type of traffic. So definitely is going to be, there is an effect on the CPU itself. Potential throughput can be reduced depending on different scenarios. So if I have a UTM firewall, and in this scenario, when we say UTM, it means that we have at least the basic security features that is being used, turned on the firewall. So we have like application control, we have IPS, we have gateway antivirus. So on a firebox such this one with the UTM services, and we are talking about HTTP traffic, then the throughput may be reduced by 10%. But if we are talking about IMX firewall, in this scenario, we are talking about different type of packets, that is TCP, UDP, different sizes, different type of protocols. The throughput may be reduced up to 40%. So this is the most noticeable, definitely going to be on the tabletop fireboxes when we get to measure the internal traffic, which is when the maximum performance is less than the potential link speed itself, right? This is another scenario. Doesn't matter what's the feature that you're going to have. You have to take a look at the throughput. We are updating the data sheets with the information that's related to the throughput, but also you have to pay attention that whenever that you are doing extra things like traffic management or quality of service, how that's going to affect your network. Also, when we are talking about IMX UDP traffic over branch office VPN, right? This is for specific the scenario in here. The throughput may be reduced up to 20%. So you have to keep that in mind. Now, when we talk about traffic management, if we take it into more details, when we want to apply traffic management to the policies, we got to define a traffic management action first, right? This is one of the first steps that we're going to do. The traffic management action, you can take a look at it as it's a profile or collection of settings, right? It's what is the guaranteed bandwidth, limitation on the bandwidth, and so on. And then you can apply this configuration on one or more policies as needed. Definitely give it a name that makes sense so that when you apply it, you know what you are dealing with. You don't need to configure the traffic management settings separately in each policy. There's another way, which is we're going to see in one of the examples once that we go to the lab environment, that we can use application control. So it doesn't matter which policy is using that application. Let's say, for example, you want to do that on voice over IP, right? And maybe it's coming through different interfaces with different policies that it's being used with the source and destination. You can still apply the traffic management to the application itself instead for a specific policy. Now, there are 3 traffic management action types that it is available for you to use. The first one, it is all policies when you apply. So action settings apply to the combined bandwidth of all the policy that uses this action, right? So if I have, let's say 5 policies that is related to VoIP, I do that on the application control level, and we do it all policies, then that bandwidth is going to be divided over that 5 policies. Per policy, the action settings apply individually to each policy that is going to be using that action. When we're talking per IP address, the action settings apply individually to each source IP address for any policy that uses that action, right? So this is if you want it to be very specific. Sometimes we use this one in a kind of a school environment, right? Where you gonna per IP address for a specific type of traffic when it comes to Facebook, for example, or streaming, that you don't want them to have more than 1 meg, for that application. Now, on the other hand, if we're going to be talking about quality of service, right? First of all, when it comes to quality of service, we need to make sure that the LAN equipment supports the quality of service marking and handling, right? When you're dealing with a switch, if there is a switch in there, the devices that is going to be handled, like, for example, voice over IP devices. Sometimes, when you talk about quality of service on an ISP level, it's actually, it's going to make the most sense if it is end-to-end. So it's starting from a specific device that's connected to a switch, connected to the firewall, go through VPN, for example, or through the ISP himself, and then it's going to be the same thing on the other side. So if you have that and honored also by the service provider, then you're going to have the best quality possible and predictable kind of performance. So this is something that you have to take into account. The use of quality of service procedures on a network requires extensive planning, right? One of the things that sometimes, depending on the different devices that you want to apply this quality of service on, a lot of time that I see that it's related to like voice over IP or streaming. They have Avaya, Mitel, or Cisco phones and so on. So the switch and also the devices, you have to have the support for the quality of service, and you have to do the planning. You understand your network, you understand what's available when it comes to the total type or requirement when it comes to the bandwidth, and how you want to put the priority to divide that bandwidth as needed. You can first identify the theoretical bandwidth available and then determine which network application is going to be high priority or that it is sensitive to latency and jitter, or both in this scenario. Another thing here that we need to mention, that for the firewall operating system supports 2 types of quality of service marking, which, as I mentioned that before, we have the IP precedence marking, which is the type of service, and the differentiated services. Today we're going to take a look at the IP precedence and how we can use it on our network, even if it is that we are not dealing with end-to-end or over VPN kind of quality of service. Other notes that relate to quality of service, that primarily an IP concept, right? When it comes to the quality of service, where the data traffic on the network, which could be a LAN, a WAN, is subject to a specific security and controls when it comes to the policies, and we want to apply quality of service to it. Layer 3 IP packets can carry either an IP precedence, which we talked about earlier in the previous slide, or the differentiated services. The advantage of differentiated services that you have more layers, right, to define in there. And if anyone that it's used quality of service before, you will be familiar with this kind of DSCP marking. Like, for example, the EF, that's one of the most famous ones, that it's related to VoIP. Right, and you can see that also in decimal, or sometimes that's related to real-time interactive, or that's related to signaling, network management, so depending on what's the type of traffic. If it's DSCP is DF, it means that it is best ever, or the effort or the decimal is going to be 0 in this scenario. So most of the time you're going to have the highest priority to real-time priority, then you have control like 10%, multimedia 10%, so on. So you do the planning and you do the quality of service marking accordingly. Right, before we go to the next topic, I think this is the good time now so that we can go to the lab environment, and I'll show you how it looks like when it comes to the configuration for traffic management quality of service. Okay, now we are in the lab environment, and we're going to see first the configuration that it's related to traffic management, and we're going to do the quality of service. So definitely the first thing that you need to do, and here I'm going to be using WSM instead of the web UI. Definitely you can do that from the web UI if you want. But in this scenario, the first thing that you need to do is to go under Setup, Global Settings, and after that, we're going to go under Networking. There's an option there that to enable all traffic management and quality of service features. So if you come to inherited the firewall or a new firewall and you couldn't actually do the configuration for traffic management quality of service because they are grayed out, it's because this option is not enabled. So you have to enable all traffic management quality of service features under networking, global settings. Once this is done, let's say now that we want to create the profile or the settings that it's related to traffic management. So to do that, I have to go under Setup, Action, and then we're going to go here under Traffic Management. This is where you're going to put the criteria or profile, and then you can use it on the level of the policy, where we're going to see one example, and then we're going to see how we can use it within application control. As you can see, I have some of them in here that's, and it will show you if it is being used in a policy or not. If you come to something that it's being used by a policy and you try to remove it, it's going to give you an error with the name of that policy, and you have to go and assign it from there to be able to delete this traffic management action. But let's say in the first example that we have, that you have a kind of an FTP server in the cloud, and you want to have one policy that allow FTP traffic, but you want to create an upload and download kind of a management action for this FTP traffic. So the first thing that we're going to do here, we're going to add a new traffic management action, and we're going to call it FTP upload, and we're gonna apply that on per policy because we're gonna have one policy, and it doesn't matter how many users that using that policy for the FTP traffic. We want to apply this kind of criteria too. So we're gonna go here with megabit per second for the connection. We have guaranteed bandwidth and the maximum bandwidth. Let's say for the guaranteed bandwidth, we're gonna say that we will go with 20, and the maximum is gonna be 30. So that's if it is available from the rest of the bandwidth and the configuration that we have on the firewall. So this is when it comes to the upload. And we're going to add another one. We're going to call it FTP download. And we're going to do it per policy. And let's say for the download, we want to limit it further. Maybe sometimes we have asymmetric connection, or maybe it's symmetric connection, but for us, when it comes to the upload to the FTP, is more important than download from the FTP. So in this scenario, I'm going to put this one as 10 megabit per second, and the maximum can be 20. Right, so these are the actions that I'm going to have in here. The next thing to do it on the level of the policy is to add the policy itself. So let's say this one is going to be an FTP proxy. I'm going to add the policy in here from any trusted to an external. Definitely you can go on the further here, configuration that it's related to which trusted network that it's going to apply to. But the most important thing that I want to show you here, it's related to advanced. So if I go under advanced, I have traffic management action that I can use in there. And I'm going to say here the forward. So this one is from to, so this is going to be, we are trying, let's say, going from the internal network to the FTP, right? So we're going to upload, and we have the other one, the reverse is download. This is where it's going to be applied. This is also, if you didn't create the action the way that I just showed you, you can actually click here and you can create the action on the spot. Is going to be added as well. If you want to edit it, you can edit it, and you can see if it is going to be per policy or not. All right. And we're going to click OK. So now we have that FTP proxy that we have traffic management that is being applied to. Another case here that I want to show you is related to application control. This is going to be very useful when using, traffic management. And this scenario here that we will have that, let's say that we want to limit YouTube on HTTPS traffic, per IP address to a specific guaranteed bandwidth and limited bandwidth. So what to do? Again, I can go the same way as before, that under setup, action, and traffic management created in there, or I can create in the policy level. But here, because we're gonna add it to the application control, doesn't matter which actually policy is gonna be using it. Then what I'm gonna do here, that I'm gonna create it on the global level under traffic management. I'm gonna add YouTube. That's going to be per IP address, and I'm going to put here megabit per second, and we're going to say, let's say the guaranteed bandwidth, it's going to be 2, and the maximum is 3 per IP address. I'm going to click OK, and I'm going to close that. Now, the next step that I can do is go to subscription services, application control, right? And I'm gonna add here a new application control for YouTube. I'm gonna search for it. So here we have YouTube. And on that level, I'm gonna set the action for a specific behavior, which is transfer, media, and access. All of them I'm going to allow, but we are allowing here with this specific condition, right? Traffic management, it's going to be YouTube. And I'm going to click OK, right? So I have one here that is called application control YouTube. And I'm going to click OK. I can go to the level of the policy here, and I can select the action if I want. Let's say I want to go to the HTTP proxy. I can go there, select the action, right? And we're gonna look for application control YouTube. That's one way that we can do that, right? There is another way that I can go to the policy itself, and under enable application control, I can choose the one that we just created. Right? These are the two ways that to do it. Let's go back here to application control under policy, and we want to apply that to HTTP proxy. Or HTTPS proxy in this scenario, because definitely YouTube is going to be using that. One of the things that it's not there anymore because we didn't actually save it earlier. So we can do that one more time quickly. Application control, YouTube. I'm gonna search for it. And we're gonna set the action for that. Everything is allow. All right. So the next thing definitely I'm gonna do, save to the firewall. And once this is saved, one of the places that you can take a look at is to go to the Firebox System Manager. There's one place there called Traffic Management. And you can see here all the configuration that we have done for the FTP download, upload, for the YouTube application in here. So as you can see, because this one is per IP address for each one of them, you can see the minimum, the maximum, total throughput that they're gonna take in this scenario. So let's say that we want to run something here in 4K. You can see now client 1, right? The usage is 21% because just an ad. So we are okay. And then you will see that in a minute is going to start picking up. I'm going to skip the ad. Make sure that this, so as you can see, even if it's 4K, it's saying that it is 360, but let's say that we're going to go here to this, and you will see that it is start spinning, because you will see that the usage is going to be going up until that it's reached to a point that it start dropping the traffic in this scenario. Can change this one to 1 second, so you will see it kind of faster. Please note that sometimes that if you use YouTube, that it will auto kind of select the speed depending on what's available, right? When it comes to the rate. So when you test, just make sure that it is going to be at least, a 4K or. All right. So this is when it comes to traffic management. Now, the next thing that we're going to be talking about, it's going to be related to quality of service. And when it comes to quality of service, same thing. You have to go under setup, global settings, make sure that networking, enable all traffic management quality of service feature is on. And then we have the first thing that we're going to take a look at here under the level of network configuration and the interfaces itself. So if you go on the level of the interface under advanced, this is where there's something called traffic management in there, where you can set the outgoing interface bandwidth, right? If it is 0, it's going to represent the physical link speed. So since this is, let's say, M370 and this is interface 0, it's going to be 1 gig, right? But sometimes the speed that you have in a specific interface is not that. And you want to have the firewall to take a point of reference when it comes to what is the actual speed is going to be used. Even if you have a 1 gig interface going outside or to your internal network, but sometimes it is actually less than that, especially if you're going through MPLS or branch office VPN or another type of connection that it is maybe just 100 meg or 50 meg, right? This is where we can set that value in here. Also, when it comes to the quality of service, this is where you can do the configuration on the level of the interface, right? There's different levels where we can set the configuration for quality of service. It can be on the interface level, a policy level itself. So here we can do the configuration here, and then on the level of the policy, we can override it depending on the type of traffic. So let's say this interface, let's go back here, the VoIP interface, right? That it is always using quality of service, doesn't matter, what's the policy that's being used in there. So in this scenario, I can do it on this level under advanced, and I'm going to say, hey, I'm going to use differentiated service or IP presence. And then you have the option to preserve or assign or clear, right? And then what is the value for it? Right, so you have 0 as best effort in there. And I'm going to, let's say, with EF. Right, this is the one that usually it's used for VoIP. And in this scenario, we're going to say that prioritize the traffic based on the quality of service marking itself, right? So this is the first place that you can do quality of service. Another place that we can do the quality of service is on the level of the policy itself. let's say that on the HTTP here, I want to do quality of service. We can go under advanced. Then we have the tab is quality of service. And then I'm going to say override per interface setting. So even if there was different configuration on the level of the interface, here on this type of traffic, which is HTTP traffic, I want to have a different handling of this protocol. So here I can, again, this is the same options that we have, differentiated services or IP presence. Then we're going to have assign, and that's the time that it will tell me that what is the value that you want to set, right? And we want to prioritize it depending on the quality of service marking, and we're going to save. This is now you will have the quality of service marking is being applied to this specific policy, regardless what's configured on the interface level. Now, one of the things that you can do here, even if that you don't have quality of service, required, is related to the management traffic itself, to the firewall. So if I go here, I have the WatchGuard Firebox Management for WSM. If I double click on that, I'm going to go under Advanced and I'm going to go under Quality of Service. So one of the things that I've done that I overridden per interface settings. So I don't care about which interface and which interface that I'm using to manage this firewall from the inside, from the outside, through the VPN traffic, right? I always want to give it more priority than any other type of traffic. This is in case if you have kind of a flooding or somebody is trying to bring down your firewall. So always the firewall is going to handle this by having higher quality of service when it comes to the management traffic to the firewall. So here I set it the marking type as IP precedence. The marking method is going to be assigned. I use the value which is the highest value as 7. Right, and we're going to prioritize depending on the quality of service marking. Another thing that it can be used for if you go to the type of DNS traffic, right? Because DNS traffic is very important. It's being used by everything to do the resolution. And let's say that you want to give it a more priority over than anything else to do the resolution. So you can go here under Advanced, Quality of Service, Override per interface, and then I'm going to go under IP precedence. I'm going to assign the marking, and I'm going to say it's not going to be 7, but let's say that we're going to be using 4 here, right, or 5 when it comes to the value. And then I'm going to have quality of service marking to prioritize the traffic based on. Right. So this is when it comes to the quality of service itself, and when it comes to the configuration, where you can do it in per interface or you can do it here per policy. Definitely to see what's going on, you have to have the quality of services turned on. You can test depending on the type of traffic. Same thing, we can go to the FSM here, and we can see that under the service watch, right? Depending on the policy that we apply to, and when you have, for example, the DNS traffic is more prioritized than any other type of traffic, you will see that it is always giving the priority over any other type of traffic. Okay, so the next topic that we have is going to be related to multi-WAN, policy-based routing, and SD-WAN. We need to understand each one of them and when to use them. And the easiest way to explain it, let's say that we have this example. This is, kind of a basic start point for these 3 different types of configuration that we can do actually 3 of them, but depending if you need it or not. So let's say that I have a firewall, I have 2 connections, one is Rogers, one is Bell. Definitely here we have also some support for USB that you can get from Rogers, Bell, or Telus, right? For LTE modem in there, in case that if you want to use that. But depending on what you are trying to do in this scenario. So If you are just looking for a kind of an overall failover or load balancing between two ISPs to make sure that you always have internet connection, then definitely we're gonna go with a multi-WAN. If we are using a specific ISP for certain policy. So let's say that I have these two ISPs, and I turn that one for failover or load balancing in this scenario. But for a specific scenario or the source for the network, let's say that it's VoIP or another type of service that always require to go through routers. And routers connect, let's say, in interface 0. In this scenario, I'm gonna go with a policy-based routing. Hey, if the source is so-and-so, then I'm going to be using a specific type of protocol, definitely. Then I'm going to be using ISP1 in this scenario. Now, another condition here, or case that it can be used, that if you want to have an auto-select for the ISP depending on the criteria per application. So let's say I have a VoIP, right? Application, and in this scenario I want it automatically to pick which one of the ISP is better depending on the loss, delay, latency, jitter, and so on. So automatically it will pick which one. In this scenario we're gonna go SD1. All right, so this one I just wanted to make sure that you understand when to use each one of them. Can I use all of them? Yes, definitely, depending on the type of the traffic, and we will see when it comes to the configuration that we can, do some actions that relate to the firewall as a whole. We can do some of the others depending on the policy of the type of the traffic that it is needed. Okay, so when we take a look at the first one, which is multi-WAN, what are the requirements and conditions? Definitely, you must have a second internet connection and more than one external interface to use multi-WAN configuration option. This is one of the questions sometimes it's been asked. I tried to do the configuration. I couldn't, even do the configuration multi-WAN. It's grayed out because the reason is that they don't have a second interface that is being set up under network interfaces. So even if you just want to explore it and you want to see the options and how to be configured, even if you don't have another one, you can actually do the configuration by adding a second one. You can enable any other interface, put it as an external, and then you have the option to do the configuration for it. Now, the conditions and requirements for multi-WAN, when we want to talk about the multi-WAN use, first, if you have a policy configured with an individual external interface alias in its configuration, you must change the configuration to use the alias any external, right? So that it can, take both into consideration. Or another alias that you can configure for the external interfaces with a different name, but it's gonna include both interfaces. Please note that sometimes you can actually support more than two, right? Sometimes you have 3 or 4 kind of interfaces that it is gonna be for external usage. If you don't do this, some connection could be denied by the firewall policy. So something that to take into consideration when using multi-WAN. Also, multi-WAN settings do not apply to incoming connection, right? This is another thing that it has to be very clear. Sometimes some people that they say, oh, I want to have this firewall and I have, the ISPs, 2 ISPs or 3 ISPs and routers, and I have a some kind of web server that it is on the DMZ, and they want to control how the incoming traffic is gonna work with a multi-WAN. Definitely this is not gonna work. Multi-WAN, it is for the outgoing traffic, not for the incoming traffic. So when you configure a policy for inbound connection, you can ignore all the multi-WAN settings in this scenario. Another thing here is to map the fully qualified domain name used by the company to the external interface IP address of the lowest order. This actually configuration is related if you're doing the management server, WSM management server. So sometimes you know that you have an issue when you do multi-WAN, especially if you have a fully qualified domain name. Always try to tie it to the lowest order external interface, so that it can identify this device properly. The last thing here we have is to use multi-WAN. You must use a mixed routing mode, all right? Because we have other mode that the firewall can work in. So if you have it in a drop-in mode or a bridge mode, right, then this multi-WAN is not going to work for sure. Now, the next topic that we have is the policy-based routing, right? When it comes to policy-based routing, it can be used when you have more than one external interface, obviously, right? And have configured your firebox for multi-WAN, or if you configure a virtual private, VPN or branch office VPN interfaces. With the policy-based routing, you can make sure that all traffic for policy always goes out through the same external interface. Even if your multi-WAN or virtual branch office VPN interface configuration is set to send traffic in a round-robin configuration. So this is one of the questions sometimes it comes up, right? But if I mix between, I have round-robin that is being done on the multi-WAN, but I want to have a policy-based routing that it's using always one connection going out for one ISP or one interface, then definitely we can use policy-based routing. So for example, if you want email to be routed through a particular interface, you can use a policy-based routing in SMTP proxy, POP3 proxy definition for that type of traffic to use always the same interface. Some restriction on policy-based routing. First of all, policy-based routing is available only if multi-WAN is enabled, or if you have configured branch office VPN interfaces. By default, policy-based routing is not enabled. Some people think, hey, I have two interfaces, I plugged in two ISPs, it's supposed to sense this automatically. No, it's not enabled by default. Policy-based routing does not apply to IPsec traffic, but it does apply to traffic distant for the trusted or optional network, which is, in this scenario, is an incoming traffic. Policy-based routing can only use an external interface. You cannot specify an interface that is configured for static NAT or one-to-one NAT or any interface type other than external. So something else that you can take into consideration. Now, the last topic that we have is related to SD-WAN, right? So SD-WAN itself, and we're going to talk about the definition of it, but it's something that is available on all the firewall that we have, T15, T20, up to the 4800, 5800, and so on. It's going to provide you with extra features that's related to building a hybrid WAN architecture. When it comes to the different type of application, it will do some of the actions dynamically, automatically, depending on the configuration that you put, which is definitely going to reduce the interaction that's required for the administrators, depending on the type of the application. Control the WAN cost by using the least expensive path with sufficient line quality, and also simplifying the management of the SD-WAN itself. So again, as we started at the beginning, all of these require more than one ISP, right? So it can be 1, 2, 3, and so on. In this scenario, I have 3 ISPs, and I also have an MPLS connection as well that I can dynamically use one of them depending on the type of the application. So what is SD-WAN, right? SD-WAN refers to software defined wide area network, right? This term itself, it is kind of changing depending on the vendor, depending on the environment that we're using. In the ISP level, it's a little bit different from the client's level or the enterprises level. So it represents the product or feature set that is used to automate the selection of the WAN interface, given that we have multiple WAN options, and based on the type of traffic and the real-time link performance metrics for each connection. So mainly it is doing the selection of the interface going out depending on a specific criteria. Now, to use SD-WAN, these are the steps that need to be done. We need to create an SD-WAN action where we're gonna have all the criteria. Create an outgoing policy for the type of traffic that you want to send to a specific external interface depending on this criteria. Sometimes you already have that policy, like say it's VoIP, but now you have two ISPs, so you don't need to create the policy again. You're just going to apply that SD action in the policy itself. So we're going to enable SD-WAN in the policy, and we're going to select the SD-WAN action that you want to apply to this policy. Okay. So it's simple, and we're going to see how we're going to work this one out. One of the things just I wanted to bring to your attention here that do not enable SD-WAN in the branch office VPN allow policies, or in policies that apply to mobile VPN traffic or incoming traffic, right? Again, I already told you earlier that when it comes to the SD-WAN multi-WAN, we are not dealing with the incoming, but with the outgoing traffic. One important note here is related to link monitor, and it's one of the steps that you need to do with the SD-WAN and multi-WAN, right? So to be able to set the criteria of the which interface that you're monitoring using what. So to monitor the status of specific interface in the firewall, you can enable something called link monitor. When you configure the link monitor for the interface, you can specify one or more link monitor targets, which are remote hosts, can be behind the firewall, like the DNS server or the ISP or a specific target in the internet. The firebox sends the traffic through the interface to the link monitor target or to verify the connectivity. So if the link monitor target does not respond, then the firebox considers the interface to be inactive. Now, the interface status is used by both multi-WAN and SD-WAN on the firewall. And we're going to go through this where you can go under network configuration, link monitor, and you see that I have two connections in there. You can put the criteria for each one of them, that it can be using DNS test for resolution, ping to a specific target. You can do a TCP connection test to a specific target, because sometimes you can ping, but sometimes the service itself it's not up. So some of the things in here for multi-WAN in failover mode, if the primary interface is inactive, then the traffic fails over to a different interface. For all other multi-WAN modes, if the primary interface is inactive, that interface is going to be no longer available as a multi-WAN interface. For SD-WAN configuration with more than one interface, if the preferred interface is inactive, then the traffic fails over to a different interface. Okay, and we will see later on also some configuration that is related to that. Okay, so I think it's good time now to jump into the demo environment, and I will show you, how to configure this link monitor, how to do configuration of multi-WAN, policy-based routing, and also for SD-WAN. Okay, we are back here in our demo environment where we're going to see the configuration that's related to the link monitoring, multi-WAN, policy-based routing, and also SD-WAN. So the first thing that we need to do is to go under network configuration, make sure that we have at least 2 external interfaces. So we have, like for example, here I have Bell, Rogers, and they've been set up. Next thing that we need to do is to go under configuration, and most of the other configuration that is needed to this topic is available in here. Number 1 is the link monitor, which is where we're gonna have to set the criteria for the validity of the link itself that we're gonna be using in multi-WAN or policy-based routing, and also specifically for SD-WAN. So as you can see, the monitor interfaces here, I have external Bell and external to Rogers, and I can set here, I have the ping for the default gateway, but I can add more criteria. So I can add here that I want to ping a specific IP address outside, which is, let's say that it is Google, right? This is one of the criteria that I want to add. Another thing that I want to do is there's ping or they can do a DNS or can do TCP in this scenario. So the target here that I want to have the DNS connection to, let's say it is to another Cloudflare. Okay. Let's get the domain here that we want to query. Right, we want to check if this resolution is going to happen from this specific DNS server, and I added that in there. Here you can require a successful probe to all targets to define the interface as active, right? So I can take that into consideration. There are some settings here related to the interface itself, which is the probe interval. By default, this is every 5 seconds. Deactivate after 3 consecutive failures and reactivate after 3 consecutive failures. So these are the defaults. Definitely you can change them depending on the criteria of your ISP or WAN connection. But usually when it comes to reactivate after, I would actually leave it at 3 or sometimes 4. I wouldn't put it as 1, just to make sure that there is no bouncing back, when it comes to maybe the connection was okay the first time and then I fell over back to it or use it in load balancing, and then there is an issue, right? Another thing that I want to bring to your attention here, that you can definitely add other interfaces if you want. I can add an internal interface. I don't have it here, but most of the time, let's say that I have an MPLS interface, right? I used one interface 4 or interface 5 for my MPLS connection. Then in this scenario, it's going to ask you what's the next hop, right, to do the check itself. Right, I'm going to delete this trusted and I'm going to say okay. So these are the configuration related to the link monitoring. The other configuration in here is related to multi-WAN. So if I go to multi-WAN, I have different options. The most popular one is the failover. So I have ISP1 and ISP2. The second one is just there in case there is an issue, and failover. So under configuration, you will see both of these interfaces, Bell and Rogers, for example, and I can change, moving up. If I move it up, it means that it's going to be the active one. The other one is going to be the backup in case of failover. If I have more interfaces, then I can decide the order of this. Some configuration, as you notice here, like sticky connection, is not going to come up with the failover. Usually it come up with round robin and route based. But some other configurations relate to the failback for active connections. This is important. So depending on the type of the traffic, right? So here, by default, it's immediate failback. So stop all active connections immediately and fail over to the second one. There is another one here, which is gradual failback. Allow active connections to use the failover interface, or no failback. So active and new connection uses the failover interface anyway, right? Sometimes when it comes to streaming or let's say voice over IP, you could see, you know, a better performance when it comes to the gradual failback instead of immediate failback. When it comes to the notification, definitely failover. It's something that, you know, depending on the administrator, it's something that you want to see. So you can send notification email. If it is, you know, monitored by the cloud, then you can see an alert that is being sent to your email. Or if you have a Dimension server, then you can use a Dimension server with SMTP or an email to send you an email in case this happened. The other options that's available here for multi-WAN is round robin, right? If you have multiple interfaces, which is ISP1, ISP2 or more, and you want to make use of all of them, then you can use the round robin. When you do the configuration, the weight for them is the same. But let's say that for Bell, it's 100 meg and the other one is 50, and you still want to use both of them, but in a more, you know, organized manner. So what you can do, you can configure this one and put the weight as 2. So in this scenario, when it's doing the round robin, you will see always that it will, you know, give the connection more to the Bell than Rogers because you have more bandwidth that's available from Bell. Other options that is available is the interface overflow, and the main reason for this, it's say that you have 3 connections, right? Or maybe sometimes 2 connection, but the second one, you know, it is built, you know, by a megabyte, right? Or whatever that the SLA that you have for your ISP, and you don't want to use it unless that you really need to. So you can do interface overflow. So if the first interface is 3 to 10 meg here by default, you can change that to a different value. Then it can use the second interface. And the last one is the routing table, where we have a specific algorithm. It's going to take all the routes that we have and the metrics into this algorithm, and it will decide which interface that it's going to be used. Right, so these are all the options that we have here for multi-WAN. I'm going to put this one back to failover in this scenario. I'm going to click OK. Now, when it comes to the policy-based routing, right, it's going to be, again, from the name, it's per policy. So let's say that for the FTP traffic that we talked about earlier, that we created a proxy for it, we wanted to use a specific interface all the time. Even let's say that for failover purposes now, for everything else, it's going to have that scenario that we have Bell is active and the other one is standing by. But let's say for this scenario that I want to have Rogers is being used for this type of traffic only, right? And everyone else currently they have the active one as Bell. But also let's say that we have load balancing, but in this scenario for the FTP, I want to have consistency that I always using Rogers or Bell because you know, it's going to a specific DNS resolution or a specific zone in this scenario. To do that, I'm gonna come here to the policy and the you know, route outbound traffic. I'm gonna choose policy-based routing, and there I'm gonna check that I want it always to be using external Bell, right? And if you notice here, if I want to have the failover, I can configure here that the second one is going to be the failover. Or because now we already have on the global level that the failover that Bell is the active and the other one is standby, I can do it the other way around, right? Can come here and say for FTP traffic all the time, use this, and then use the other, you know, connection. Sometimes it makes more sense depending on the ISP, or if you have more than 2, right? Then you can have like through MPLS that you have all the FTP traffic. If it's not available, then you can use one of the other connections that you have as internet connection. So this is the per policy routing. Now, when it comes to multi-WAN, right? So for multi-WAN, it shares the same thing when it comes to the configuration that relate to the link monitoring in there. That's a must that has to be done. And then we're gonna come here under SD-WAN where we're gonna create an action, right? So the action is the criteria that we're looking for. So let's say that I want to apply this SD-WAN action on VoIP, right? I'm gonna call this SD-WAN action VoIP. And I'm going to say, hey, I'm going to be using 2 interfaces in here. If I have more, I can use, or I can use, 2 out of 3, or, 2 out of 4. And then the metrics, when it comes to the loss rate, latency, and jitter, I can choose all of them or one of them. As you can see here, there's an option failover if values for all selected measurements are exceeded. So if I choose this, it means that all of these checkboxes has to be met before that IMB, decide which one that I have to use, right? So this is something to take into account. These are kind of a defaults. There is a document that it's under the help for WatchGuard SD-WAN actions that you can see what is the defaults and what is recommended, for example, for voice over IP, right? And in this scenario, I'm gonna put it a gradual failback, and I'm gonna say okay. So once I created this as an action, then I can find, or I can create my VoIP policy. If I already have it, then I can use it. I have one here. So I can go to my VoIP policy and I say route the outbound traffic using SD-WAN in this scenario. And we have a drop-down menu here. We're going to use VoIP. Still, you can take a look at it here and find out what's the configuration, or that you can create a new one if you need. Right? So these are the steps that it's required when it comes to the SD-WAN itself. Let's push this configuration here. And I'll show you in the FSM where you can actually take a look at the SD-WAN. Okay, so if I come here on the FSM, you can see that we have the SD-WAN. You notice that I have global, FTP, and VoIP. So the global, it's a failover, right? We have external Bell and external routers with immediate failback. The one that we created, which is the VoIP in this scenario, and we have the FTP, right? The FTP, this one is the policy-based routing that is using only the external, is going to be Bell. There are different things definitely here. It's just because the second one is not up. So some of the things that you can take a look at is the performance metric. You can see the loss information on this specific link. You can see the latency. You can see here by default here for the latency currently for Bell that I am using, it's 10 milliseconds. Or you can see the jitter as well, which is around 5.12 millisecond. Okay, that's all that we have for today. Today's session was related to optimizing performance and also for different type of configuration that's related to quality of service, traffic management, how to do the configuration, what's the difference between them. Also, we explored different type of configuration related to policy-based routing, multi-WAN, and SD-WAN. I hope that it was a useful session. We're gonna wait here for a few minutes to take a look at the questions that you have. If you have any other questions, please type them now so that we can answer them. Other than that, please take a few minutes to scan this QR code or go to this link for Tech Thursdays to have the feedback on today's session, and also on Team Canada's Tech Thursdays and overall. Thank you so much.